So back on February 11th, one of the hearings we were at when we had all that snow, you made a pretty bold statement. You said, there's no joking around now. I mean, we're headed in a way that could take this nation to second-class status. That's how serious this is. Let me say, I come from a farm state, one of the most heavily dependent states on agricultural programs of any state. I'm ready to take on farm support and reduce even what was in the bill that I just helped pass. That's how serious I am about getting this done. Yet your recent votes really aren't reflecting that seriousness. On March 4th, when your colleague on the Budget Committee, Senator Sessions, introduced an amendment to reduce the deficit by establishing discretionary spending caps, you voted no. That amendment was one vote shy of passing. The next week, when Sessions introduced his amendment again, you didn't vote.
Let me deal with each one of
Sure,
these.
go ahead.
Discretionary caps in this economic environment, I think would be a mistake. We've got to remember there's a difference here between what we need to do to strengthen the economy short term and longer term. In the short term, we've got to provide liquidity to this economy. That means in the short term, larger deficits. We then have to pivot and deal with this long-term issue. That's the point I was trying to make.
Right. So what do you think?
I think it would be a very serious mistake to try to reduce the deficit when the economy is this weak. And I think most economists would agree. But we can't get confused by that. That doesn't mean we don't need to pivot and take on the long-term debt.
So
that's really what the Debt Commission is about.
So is that where we start with the Debt Commission? Are they going to make the bold actions that we really need? I mean, or is, I understand that you don't, in the way the economy is, we don't want to limit what we can spend, but we've got to start somewhere. I mean, we're spending trillions and everything just adds up and adds up. So where do we start?
It is a matter of timing. The best economists that have come before us have said in the next year or two, you've got to continue to provide liquidity. Then you've got to pivot and begin the deficit and debt reduction. So over 5 years, the budget that I will propose will take our deficits from 10% of GDP down to 3%. But that's not good enough long term. Then we have to make these longer term changes on entitlements and revenue reform that take us the rest of the way. So, a lot of these amendments that have been offered to reduce the deficit right now, I think are just a mistake. And I'm a huge deficit hawk.
Right.
But you don't try to reduce the deficit when the economy is very weak. That'll only make it weaker.
So you're saying maybe 2-3 years from now we start to reduce the deficit?
The best economists that have come before us have said probably this year, I'm talking about 2011 as the budget we're working on, 2012, you've got to continue to provide liquidity. Then you've got to begin the pivot to bring these deficits down. The budget that I will propose will bring the deficit down pretty dramatically over 5 years, from 10% of GDP to 3%. But then, with the baby boomers coming on, then we've got to do even more. That's why the entitlement reforms, which will take that amount of time to put in place anyway, need to be put in place, and the revenue reforms, which, by the way, will also take time.
Yeah, and so what about, the partisanship? I think that the average American that looks into Washington, D.C., they just see this inability of anyone to work together. There's no reaching across the aisles. There's he said, she said going on. And so how are we going to get past that? Because this is going to be probably the biggest thing we've ever done. And how do we...
It is a huge challenge. I was just talking, just before I came out here, a member was asking me that very question. Judd and I, although we disagree on what to do, agree very strongly on the process to begin to address these issues. And we offered something to our colleagues. We got 53 votes, Republicans and Democrats, for this deficit reduction initiative. And, we got to try. Maybe we won't, on the first attempt, reach a conclusion. But we've got to try. We've got to put together a plan, and then we've got to implement the plan.
And now, how do you think our chances of getting the plan passed
I
are?
was just asked.
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't put a high percentage on it.
Yeah.
The first shot. You know, I've talked to almost every member that's been named down.
Mm-hmm.
In the Senate, I've talked to every member. I've said to them, you know, I pray that we find a way to get this done.
Yeah.
For our country's sake.
Right.
And every one of them from the Senate has said to me, look, they're committed to try.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I think a lot of
But
Americans
it's hard.
out there,
That's hard.
you know, it's tough because, you know, there's so much partisanship going on, and they can get back in power.
It is very, very hard. But, you know, what I said, I believe.
Yeah.
If we fail here, the consequences for the country are enormous. And it isn't that you go out there and you just fall off the cliff. That's unlikely to happen. What's more likely to happen is kind of a slow, steady decline
Yeah.
for the strength of the country.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't have to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to happen. It isn't really, at the end of the day, all that tough. We don't have to ask all that much. We got to change the trend line.
Uh-huh.
And a small change now makes a big difference later.
Right. So, young Americans, what should we be doing?
Organize and educate.
Organize and educate. Well,